The number on my pill organizer Monday morning used to make me angry. Not sad, angry, because I know too much to pretend I don't know what I know. I'm 84 years old. I spent 32 years as a registered nurse. I have seen what happens inside a body when you treat symptoms instead of causes. I have watched it happen to patients I cared for, to friends I loved. And I'll be honest with you, I watched it start happening to me before I put my foot down and said enough. So when someone tells me that the average American over 65 now spends nearly twice as much money on prescriptions as they do on food, I don't find that shocking. I find it heartbreaking, because I know exactly how that happens. I watched it happen to a woman I worked beside for 11 years, a surgical nurse, smart as anyone I've ever met, someone who knew the body the way a mechanic knows an engine. By the time she was 73, she was on 9 medications, not because she was unlucky, because nobody ever sat down and connected the dots between what she was eating and what her body was falling apart from. And here's the thing I keep turning over in my mind about her story. I'll come back to it because how it ended surprised even me. But first let me say this plainly. If your monthly prescription bill is higher than your monthly grocery bill, the problem is not that you need more prescriptions. The problem is almost certainly that you've been spending money in the wrong place for years, and the system around you was never financially motivated to tell you that. I know that sounds harsh, but I was a nurse. I'm not interested in comfortable lies at this stage of my life. Here's what I mean. When I was working, a 7-minute appointment was considered generous. A doctor sees dozens of patients a day, and what insurance reimburses in 7 minutes is a diagnosis and a prescription, not a conversation about whether you've been eating enough fiber. Not a question about how much protein you had for breakfast. A prescription. That's what moves through the system. That's what gets paid for. I'm not blaming the doctors. Most of them are doing their best inside a structure that wasn't designed to keep you well. It was designed to treat you when you're sick. Those are two entirely different businesses. What I started paying attention to toward the end of my career, and then even more seriously after I got sick myself, was how often people were paying twice for the same problem. They were paying with cheap, convenient food that slowly damaged their cardiovascular system, their gut, their blood pressure, and then they were paying again, sometimes thousands of dollars a year, for medications that managed the consequences of that damage. The damage itself was still there. The drugs just kept the numbers inside a range that looked acceptable on paper. 30%. That's the number that changed how I thought about all of this. A major clinical trial, one of the largest nutrition studies ever done, followed over 7,000 adults for nearly 5 years and found that people eating a Mediterranean-style diet had a 30% reduction in heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular death. 30%. The same reduction that statins are prescribed to produce. And I'm not against statins across the board. There are people who genuinely need them. But 1 in 5 people who take statins report muscle pain and fatigue significant enough to affect their daily life. Some develop memory fog. Some end up back at the doctor's office 6 months later with a new problem that turns out to be a side effect of the first prescription, and they leave with another prescription to manage that. I watched this cycle hundreds of times. The pharmacist gets paid every step of the way. Nobody gets paid to hand you a grocery list. Now, I want to tell you something I learned the hard way about protein, because I wasted years not understanding this, and I don't want you to make the same mistake. After 60, your body starts losing muscle. This is not a moral failure, it's physiology. The rate is somewhere between 3 and 8% per decade unless you actively fight it. And the way you fight it is not complicated, but it is specific. You need somewhere around 25 to 30 grams of complete protein at each meal, not total for the day crammed into dinner, per sitting. The reason is that muscle protein synthesis, the actual process of your body building and repairing muscle tissue, only gets triggered when you hit that threshold in one sitting. A little bit at breakfast, a little bit at lunch, and a big steak at dinner doesn't do what 3 balanced meals does. I know this now. I didn't always eat this way. I do now. A container of Greek yogurt in the morning, eggs or legumes at lunch, fish or chicken at dinner. It's not elegant. It's not a diet plan with a name. It's just understanding what your body actually needs and giving it that. No prescription required, because here is something interesting. The pharmaceutical industry has never successfully created a drug for age-related muscle loss. They've tried. They can't patent eating correctly, and they can't replicate what food does in the body with any molecule they've invented yet. That matters. Now, I want to come back to something, because there's a piece of this that most people never find out about, and it costs them real money every single month. I'll get to it in a minute, but I need to tell you first about a neighbor of mine, a retired school principal, 79 years old, sharp mind, still does the crossword every day. She came to me genuinely distressed about 18 months ago. Her prescription costs had gone up again, and she couldn't figure out where to cut. She showed me her medication list. I looked at 3 of the drugs on that list and immediately asked her if anyone had ever mentioned the generic versions. She looked at me like I had asked her something in a foreign language. Her doctor always wrote the brand name. The pharmacy always filled the brand name. Nobody had ever said a word. FDA regulations require that a generic drug contain the exact same active compound at the exact same dose as the brand name version. Chemically identical. That's not an opinion. That's the law. By switching just 3 of her medications to their generic equivalents, she saved, and I want you to hear this number, she saved just over $1,800 in the first year. $1,800, enough to cover her entire grocery budget for 6 months with money left over. She cried when she figured out how long she'd been overpaying. 12 years. 12 years of brand name prices when she didn't have to be. If you are currently paying brand name prices for any medication, the most powerful thing you can do today is call your pharmacy and ask what the generic equivalent costs. Not next week. Today. But here's what I keep thinking about, and I want you to sit with this question for a moment, because I think it gets at something much larger than just the generic swap. If nobody in the system is financially motivated to save you money, what else isn't being said? When I got my cancer diagnosis in 2009, stage 3, I was 67 years old, and after I got through surgery and treatment, I made a decision that I don't regret for a single day. I went back to everything I knew about the body as a nurse, and I looked honestly at how I had been living, not to beat myself up, but because I wanted to understand what I could actually control going forward. What I found, looking at the research with fresh eyes, was humbling. The connection between systemic inflammation and disease outcomes was clearer in the literature than I had ever fully absorbed while I was working. And the foods that drive inflammation versus the foods that quiet it were not mysterious. They were just inconvenient to talk about in a healthcare system built on billable procedures. 30 grams of fiber a day from real food, lentils, oats, vegetables, does three things simultaneously that pharmaceutical companies spend enormous resources trying to replicate separately. It pulls LDL cholesterol down measurably. It slows glucose absorption so your blood sugar doesn't spike after meals. And it feeds gut bacteria that produce a compound called butyrate, which is a natural anti-inflammatory that works through your entire system. 3 medications worth of benefit from groceries, not a treatment, prevention that also happens to taste like a decent meal. And then there is the question I want to ask you directly. The one that took me too long to ask my own doctors. Go to your next appointment, and before you leave, ask this. Is there a food or lifestyle change that could replace or reduce this medication? That exact question. I know it feels uncomfortable. It might feel like you're challenging the doctor, and you're not. You're asking for complete information. But here's what I learned from my surgical nurse friend, the one I mentioned at the beginning. Late in life, she started asking that question. Her doctor, a good one as it turned out, told her that 2 of her 9 medications were managing conditions that had likely developed because of dietary deficiencies that had built up over years. She changed how she ate. Within 14 months, she was off those 2 prescriptions entirely. She told me it was the first time in years she felt like herself again. Not fixed, not young, like herself. I think about that often. Magnesium is something I want to mention specifically because the gap between what it costs and what it prevents is almost insulting. Close to 60% of adults over 65 are deficient in magnesium. That deficiency quietly shows up as insomnia, leg cramps, elevated blood pressure, irregular heartbeat, and anxiety. 5 symptoms, 5 different specialists potentially, 5 separate prescriptions at $40 to $200 a month each. Magnesium glycinate from any pharmacy shelf addresses all 5 for under $12 a month. You will never see it advertised during the evening news because there is no profit margin worth advertising. That's not cynicism. That's just how the economics work. I grow things now. Walter thinks it's funny watching me out there in the garden. I have a small raised bed, built it myself 4 years ago for less than $80 in materials. Basil, rosemary, kale, tomatoes, peppers. I'm out there most mornings for a few minutes, which means I'm also walking and bending and moving in the morning light, which has its own value. But what I'm actually harvesting is something pharmaceutical companies spend billions of dollars trying to isolate and synthesize into a pill. The compounds in fresh rosemary, in kale, in tomatoes, they exist in those plants in forms your body recognizes and uses in ways that extracted, concentrated, bottled versions simply don't replicate as well. Fresh to the table for less than one monthly prescription copay, every month, every season. I can't explain to you why nobody in healthcare will hand you a packet of seeds and say, start here. I can only tell you that they won't, and that you should do it anyway. I want to say something to you before I close, and I mean this with everything in me. You are not powerless inside this system. I know it can feel that way. The bills pile up, the appointments feel rushed, the medications multiply, and at some point it starts to feel like this is just what getting old costs. But getting old and getting sick are not the same thing. They overlap, yes, but they are not the same thing. And the gap between them is larger than most people are ever told, because the gap is filled with groceries and movement and questions asked at the right moment, not with billable procedures. I'm 84. I take care of a man with dementia every single day. I walk every morning. I eat deliberately. I am not doing any of this from a position of perfect health or abundant resources or extraordinary luck. I'm doing it because 32 years as a nurse taught me that the body responds to what you give it, and you get to decide, more than anyone profits from you knowing, what that is. Your body keeps score. Treat it like it matters, because it does. If something I said here landed for you, if there's someone in your life who's drowning in prescriptions and nobody's ever asked them the right question, share this with them. Leave me a comment telling me one thing you're going to change at your next grocery run. I read them. And if you want to keep hearing what 84 years of living actually teaches you, stay around. I'm not going anywhere.